Everyone, my name is Joseph Amsili from New York Soil Health, and I'm excited that we could still put on what we've been calling this Empire Farm Days Soil Health Center, although Empire Farm Days was forced to cancel this year due to COVID-19. We're looking forward to at least the possibility that maybe folks that couldn't have joined us at Empire Farm Days at the physical location can be here with us today, and then we can have the opportunity to have a good recording that will be available for folks. So this event was organized by New York Soil Health and also the New York Soil Health Working Group, which is a unique interagency working group that brings folks together from NRCS, Soil Water Conservation Districts, American Farmland Trust, New York Farm Viability Institute, different innovative farmers, different industry partners. King AgriSeed has played a big role in helping organize this year's event. And obviously Empire Farm Day, so we were in communication leading up to the event because we were thinking it was gonna potentially be in person, so we just want to thank all those partners. And I want to acknowledge a couple individuals who were behind the scenes of today's effort: Aaron Ristow of American Farmland Trust, Greg Albrecht, who helped get us CCA credits for all these talks, and Paul Ceylon, who helped make the connection for David Dumb as a speaker for today. After the two talks, we'll be showing the CCA PowerPoint slides, which gives you the information needed to register for the two credits available, CCA credits for today. One other small note is if you're not already subscribed to the New York Soil Health listserv, that's a good way to hear about more things like this. So with that, we're ready to start the first day or the second day of programming. Yesterday's event was a success. If you were here with us yesterday. Today we have David Dumb from Binkley and Hurst and Jennifer Moore Kucera from American Farmland Trust, who will join us at 11. But for now, first up, we have David Dumb, who's a planter specialist with Binkley and Hurst, which is a case dealer in Lillet's, PA. He's given numerous presentations all over the country and at different no-till or strip-till conferences on planters. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dave.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. We're going to, as my title says, making the most of your planting experience without breaking the bank. And I guess one of the things that I like to highlight is some of it's the small details that aren't, necessarily buying a brand new planter to do it, but it's what we're using to make the best job of what we have. So we'll get started here. And as I said, it doesn't really matter whether you're planting into heavy cover crop or into, stubble or worked ground. It's how well we're going to do to get that seed placed in the ground. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, and some of the things to look out for on your planter, some of the newer technologies that are coming, some of the things that do affect yield, and things to pay attention to. So when we think about what our planter's doing, we got three jobs that planter's doing. We want to have even seed depth. We want to have good seed to soil contact and proper closing of the seed trench. So these are three important things that we're doing with that planter. We don't do a good job with these three, we're going to see issues with yield, stand, and all. So we'll talk about how some of these relate to the planter. So when we start talking about peak performance of the planter, the one that I want to highlight and we'll talk some about through here is proper maintenance of planters, choosing the proper attachments. And I think sometimes the one that's really missed more than anything is adjustment of the field and the planter, taking the time behind the planter and making sure that it's doing the job that we are expecting. So what type of things can affect yield? Of course, the population. Are we putting the right population for our soil conditions, moisture? I mean, weather is one that we can't always control. some areas, yes, they do irrigate, and also we can control some of our moisture and fertility of the soil. So, these are things that, we need to consider when we're going out to plant, population, what can our soil moisture in the fields that we're going to be in and fertility support. And so we aren't going to touch much more on that. I'm a machinery man, not an agronomist per se, but I just want to hit a few things here. One of the things we talk about ear count and yield. So on the whole, 1 ear is equal to roughly 7 bushel per acre. So if you do a stand count at on a thousandths of an acre and count the viable ears, roughly you're 7 bushel, depending on a little on the side of the ear and all. So it gives you a little thought process to go look at what an ear does. And so what happens if we don't have good ears or don't put on ears? Couple things to think about. We set the yield at up to about V8. We're setting the yield V8. The yield is set. All we can do after that point is take yield away because of weather conditions or insect damage or lack of fertility at that point. So the early stages of that plant growth is so important. I mean, the yield in the bag is great, but everything we can do from there on reduces yield. So it's very important that when we start thinking about yield potential, what we do in that early stages of the plant growth. So, and in about V4, the plant is actually setting the number of rows in the plant. So, as I said, again, very early, some of the plant is setting some of what's going to happen down the road. So we don't do a good job early. We can stress it down the road. Some of this is showing what happens later if we run out of moisture or run out of some other conditions. But when we think about it, the ear itself is set right to start with, very early, what it's going to do. So we can start looking at a skip in a thousandths of an acre. We're going to look at about 5.7 bushel loss for having a skip. So if we're seeing skips, and I always tell guys being out, I like to look at a field early because a skip isn't necessarily, I'm a machinery fellow, so I get blamed because we got skips in the field. I like to dig very often. The planter's done it, sometimes it's done its job, put a seed there, but for some reason that seed is not viable. Either it's part of the non-germination seed that's in the bag, or did it get insect damage? Did it not get placed properly in the seed trench? So those are things we'll talk a little bit as we go through here. A double, if you're starting to see doubles, they're going to say you get about 2.8 bushel loss. Some of that's just because you're overplanted, the plants are being stressed. But the one that, and spacing, it can, seeds closer than 4 inches, we'll see some amount of ear reduction size. Again, that's a double, so you get 2 ears that probably have reduced size when you get them close together. So like they show here, ear 83 was 2.5 inches from ear 84. So it's showing stress from being too close to the neighbor. And if you look at 84, you can see it truncated the tip a little bit because it was being stressed. So we do want it good inline. But the one thing that sort of struck me recently and some of the things we've done is what affects ear count. And of course, we're talking ear count. In other words, what viable ears do we put on? So emergence has become a very critical thing that I look at more. So if the plant itself looks to be within 24 to 34 hours, 38 hours, 48 hours, those plants all ought to be out of the ground together. If we get outside that window, they start looking at being a weed to each other, and they become in competition. The roots are competing. So if you have plants that are late emergers, those are going to be the ones. So if we look at a plant that's 32 to 48 hours later coming up than its neighbors, we're going to say we got about 5/10 of a loss on that ear. If we get to an L2, which is more than 48 hours, we're going to see a total loss on that ear. That plant probably is not going to put a viable ear on. So it's so important, and I think to go scout fields and see how even is that coming up. In other words, within that first 24 hours, we should see our final population. We shouldn't be waiting a week or so to see our final population. We're dropping yield by doing that. Some of the things that we've looked at, as I said, being a planter guy, I get guys hit me up for, my planter didn't do the job, I got skips, and then I go digging and find seed. And I think a couple things to understand with seed, there are different types of germination tests. And the warm germ test is what you normally see on the bag. They put it in a warm medium at 77 degrees for 6 days and count the germination. That should give you 93% or better. And then there's a cold germ test where they put it in a moist medium, 50 degrees for 7 days, and then 73 degrees for 5 days. So that's 85% or better. And then so what happens is if you are planting in cold conditions, this is sort of a mean days to germination by soil, soil temperature. If you start looking and you start getting in that 50-degree soil and colder, you look at the number of days to you germinate. So the longer that seed sits in the ground and doesn't germinate, we are going to see seed that becomes non-viable, not going to put maybe even come up out of the ground. I've seen this quite often, and then as I said, to do some germ tests, these cold germ or cold saturated germ tests, we can see a lot of variation in what a seed will be able to handle and come up in adverse conditions. It doesn't mean that seed with poor cold germ tests can't be used. It just needs to be a management tool, not to plant it before a cold rain or in cold, wet soil, because it's not going to do well. Had a customer a couple years ago come in, and he had a 16-row planter and split it 8 and 8. Had a field that he knew lay a little wet. They were calling for rain, and so he went in and planted it, thought he would get in and get it planted before it rained, because he knew if he didn't, it'd be a few weeks maybe to get back in and plant it, be late planted then. And he said, I never saw anything like it. He said the 8 rows of the one hybrid just came up just fine, and the other one, he said, I hardly had a stand, maybe a 50% stand. I said, I'm going to have to go back and replant it. Had to go borrow his old 8-row planter from a neighbor that had bought it from, to go in and patch in the 8 rows. And he was like, I can't understand it. I planted it with the same planter the same day. And then we got talking about this cold germination and the strength of the seed. And it's an issue to look at. The seed companies don't always want to put it on their bag, but something that we're seeing more and more of. And I've seen that in fields too, that, we start seeing skips. You dig and you got seed that's become unviable because it doesn't have a cold germ in adverse conditions. So something to look at, when your seed, large lots, check, ask your seed guy, what's the cold germ on this lot? It can vary. So something to look at. So we look at what are our priorities of the planter pass. So really what we're doing is we're looking at ear count. That's what we're trying to do. We want to maximize our ear count. So we have emergence is the base of it. So if we don't do a good job with emergence, we're going to start, that's the foundation our ear count's based on. Singulation, how well are we singulating the seed with the planter? Spacing is not one of the major ones. And population, yes, that's one that we control real easy how we set. But when you think about it, it's all based on emergence. So if we don't have good even emergence, some of the rest of our pyramid is going to be be on shaky foundation. So things that we would want to pay attention to with emergence is depth of seeding, tillage practices, temperature of soil moisture, and the soil moisture. So, you know, are we planting into moisture? Do we have adequate soil temperature? I was out this spring with some of the new technology with a smart firmer on, and we were getting a planter started, and I was sort of shocked that day that I didn't see a soil temperature read on that smart sensor above 40 degrees. And I'm like, man, I sure wouldn't be planting a lot of corn at 40 degree soil temperature. But I was sort of glad that we got a planter started that day, but it wouldn't be one that I would want to put my hammer down and keep planting in those conditions, because I think we're going to see some issues depending on the variety. So I talk about some of the technology. I'll just hit, this is a smart firmer where we actually have in the back of that seed firmer with smart technology, and it has an infrared sensor in it, so we can do soil moisture with it. There's a temperature sensor in, so we get temperature. So again, you know, we can do some of that manually to go and look. Are we, you know, should we go a ½ inch deeper to get into soil moisture so we get that nice even germination? Are we consistently in the moisture? So, you know, as I said, we start talking about things to do. I like to start, you know, with down pressure. Do we have adequate down pressure on the row units? Are we maintaining our depth? I mean, depth is very important. And I mean, if we have to go 2 inches deep to get into moisture, we got to have enough of down pressure to put the planter in the ground. So we're going to, you know, it doesn't matter whether we got, you know, springs or airbags, are they adjusted for the conditions we're planting in? Do we have adequate down pressure? We're not don't have over pressure, more pressure than we need. Again, simple maintenance, or our springs are all there. We don't have broke springs. You know, can we adjust them? Some of them some of the older styles are much harder to adjust, probably never did get adjusted. When we're in that area too, we can look a little bit at the parallel arms and make sure that the parallel arms are in good shape. And, you know, we don't have a lot of slop in those arms. We get slop in the arms, that's going to affect our evenness of depth. Again, you know, we start with some of the newer technology. We start about pinch point rows, you know, between transport wheels and all. Probably might need a little more pressure on those rows than in the rows between them. And so that's something to be thinking about, you know, checking multiple rows. Do we have adequate down pressure across the board? Some might have to be changed a little different than another row. Of course, I said new technology coming, the hydraulic down pressure, where we're actually putting a weigh cell on the gauge wheels and adjusting on the go to maintaining a set pressure on the gauge wheels versus, you know, trying to figure out what is adequate down pressure. So we're actually going row by row. Again, you know, do we take a look at gauge wheels? Gauge wheels affect our depth. The gauge wheel here on the left, you think about it, it's down in our area, we got rocks and we bend gauge wheels up. And so you think about that, that's no longer round. So what it's going to do to our depth as it goes round, it's going to keep changing our depth. We're not going to have consistent depth. So something that we need to pay attention to. Another thing with the planter, we'd like to have a little contact along this area with our gauge wheel. If we think about it, especially in work ground, if this thing is gapping, I can put my hand up between, we start what I call rooster tailing dry dirt into our seed trench. Well, do we really want dry dirt thrown around our seed? No, again, it's going to affect that good seed to soil contact with moisture, so we get that even germination. So that's another maintenance point. You know, do we need to replace gauge wheel arms, or do we need to just shim our gauge wheels here to maintain contact here so we don't get that dry dirt, surface dirt, getting rooster tailed with the gauge wheel into our seed trench. So another little thing to look at on a planter that we want to be careful with, that simple maintenance that in effect how well we place our seed in the ground. Been a lot of discussion over the last few years on coulters and, you know, no coulters, coulters. And a couple things that I do look at is, I mean, this was, I remember back in when they had AC first came out, they used a big wide coulter and we were trying to work ground up. I think it was, we couldn't figure we could no-till without having loose dirt to plant into. So we used a wide coulter. It's not one that I would use today in front of a planter row unit. Throws more dirt at the speeds we're planting. Here's one, the bubble blade, great penetration in dry soil, but it can create issues in wetter soils that we will sort of glaze the sidewall, make a smooth sidewall, make roots very hard to get out of the seed trench. To me, that's a no-till coulter blade only for drier conditions. It's not one for early spring planting when you can get a little wet, especially with some clay content in your soil. Your 13 way or your turbo blades are probably the ones that are being used more than anybody. One of the things that I caution is that no-till coulter blade shouldn't be running any deeper than the seed opener blade. We want the seed opener blade to be set in the bottom of the trench, not the coulter blade, because we can't have consistency there. So those are some of the things to look at. Coulters, again, just, you know, basic maintenance. Are my bearings good? Are the diameters adequate to do the job? One of the areas that I do see very often is seed opener blades not being extremely worn. As I said, these pictures are pictures off of, quote, field ready planters that got traded in, or planters that we did up times on. And you know, a typical Deere Kinsey planter, the new blade is 15 inches new. You should be changing them out at about 14 and a half. Doesn't seem like a lot of wear, but when we start wearing too far, you know, we start exposing our seed tube guard. Our seed tubes down here can get broke off. You know, this is going to hurt us. We aren't going to keep that nice true V. So those are maintenance things. They're wear items. When we go into no-till, we're going to see faster blade wear. I mean, but in the days when we used moldboard plows and chisel plows, we were changing shears and points quite readily. I mean, it's no different. We're doing some tillage work and working ground. Those are wear items that will need serviced. When we install new blades, a couple things. Anytime we will change blades, we will also change this frog or inner seed tube guard and keep it fresh, because it prevents the blades from going in and rubbing on the seed tube as you're going through the ground. On the opener blades, we want to set them in so that they are, we take a business card top and bottom. We're looking, especially now when they're using these new heavier blades, we want about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of contact. Older manuals would have said 2 to 3, but with the heavier blades, the blades don't flex, and we'll take out our bearings and hubs much quicker because there's too much preload on them if we shim them much heavier than that. Closing wheels, again, it is maintenance. What's going to work best in your conditions. We want to make sure that our seed trench is centered between the closing wheels, so we're doing the even from both sides. You know, if this thing is sloppy, your tail wheel brackets are sloppy and it's going back and forth, we can't do a nice job closing from both sides of the row. Again, you know, checking bearings, checking to make sure we got rubber closing wheels, that the tires are off. As I said, there are, I'll say there's 100 different closing wheels out there. They all work specifically better in some conditions than others. The other thing that I will caution is, on some of them, is you need to read the manufacturer's instructions on proper setup and installation so that they do the job that they're supposed to. The Martin spike, we want 2¼ to 2½ inches between the spikes at the bottom, or we'll start getting into the seed trench and moving dirt. As I said, there are so many closing wheels out there. I will tell some guys that, oh, I think I need a different closing wheel. Try a row or two. Don't always redo the whole planter with something till you try it on a row or two and see how it does and compare. But again, making sure we follow the manufacturer's recommendations for spacing, and also make sure that bearings are all in good shape. Some new technology. This is some automatic control down pressure on the tail wheel brackets coming out. Two-stage, looking at two-stage, trying to close the trench from the bottom up and then tucking the top, finishing the top off. Some of the spike wheels, we will pull drag chains. And what's the idea of the drag chain? If you look at this, is no drag chain. You can sort of still see where on a spike closing wheel, you can sort of see where the trench was. You pull the drag chain, you just pull enough of loose dirt to close up any few last air pockets on the top. That's one of the things that we want to see, that seed trench closed. A corn plant likes to be an inch and a half, minimum an inch and a half deep. And if it sees light before an inch and a half, like an open seed trench, it's going to change some of the ear height set and all, because it thinks it's planted shallow. So we want to make sure we close that seed trench completely. Why do we use spike closing wheels, or why do we have some of these wheels? We're trying to break this sidewall compaction. You get the right conditions. I mean, you look at this sort of has a glaze to it. As I said, a bubble blade, or if it's wet conditions, we get a glaze here. So it makes it very tough for the soil roots to get out. So we're trying to mechanically break that sidewall up so that we give spots that roots can get out of the seed trench. So if you would dig plants up and see roots that look like this is an indication that we probably planted wet and had that glazing on the sidewall, and our roots, especially our early roots, don't ever get outside that seed wall. So you think about how we were restricted later in the season, moisture availability of that plant, going out and getting nutrients. Did see a little bit in a couple fields this spring. I was amazed to see, I could see it. Somebody made the comment, they had the fertilizer guy out and checking something. He said, I never saw roots. When I dug up one plant, I pulled up the neighboring plant or so. Well, they were so intertangled because they got out in that seed trench, and that's where all the roots grew because they couldn't get out of the seed trench. So if you're seeing some of this, it is a good time to go and take a look at, are we doing things that make our sidewall slick? We also talk about, we're doing more cover crop, we're doing more, no-till. The residue management actually starts in the fall. We want to make sure that we spread that residue over the whole combine width. I mean, if we're running a 30-foot head or 35-foot head, we need to be spreading that residue over the whole thing. Couple things, I mean, it is nutrients that's not being adequately, evenly spread. I mean, you wouldn't want your dry fertilizer box to have an uneven spread pattern. You should take time to calibrate them and make sure you've got an even spread pattern. Same thing goes with your combine and all, that you want to spread that residue evenly over the whole width of the machine. As I said, it's a little hard to set up a planter especially if it doesn't match up with the header that you actually are handling the residue right the whole way across the planter. We've seen much more input with no-till and cover crops that goes to trash sweeps. Again, it's a little bit like closing wheels. There's any number out there. One of the things I tell people, a trash sweep is not a tillage tool. It is supposed to brush the residue off the surface, but it's not supposed to make a deep gash. It's supposed to get the residue out. So 2 reasons: brush some of the residue off so that we get a little more warming of the soil, and also that we do not hairpin residue in with our culver or seed opener blades. And again, if we put residue into the seed trench and we put the seed in there, again, we've affected our seed to soil contact, and hence how quickly that will emerge versus neighbors that aren't that way. Well, one of the things that have come out more to help, fine tune that as we change conditions across the field and all is air cylinders or hydraulic down pressure on the sweeps, where we can pull pressure off sweeps and up and off and add depending on how we're trying to move residue in the field. The importance of sweeps, this was a sort of showing some things in a field day. We had a planter we had done with the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance and the Extension Service down here in Pennsylvania. We had taken a trade planter in and left one row the way it got traded. We did the next row, we basically did an uptime but changed no equipment on it. And then the other 4 rows, we made some equipment changes to plant different conditions and residue. And they did numerous test plots. The picture on the right there was a field day, summer field day for crop consultants that we helped participate in. There's cover crop, and they had cover crop that had burned down over about a 4-week period. So we went through different areas, and this is what a sweep, the sweep moves stuff away. We got a nice clean seed soil place to plant our seed in. We didn't hairpin. This was the row that was the way it was. End of the pointer is the seed. That seed never got in the seed trench. It was sitting on top, all wedged in with organic matter that was on the surface. It's not going to be a very good viable seed to germinate. It's, maybe if we get rain late or something it will, but it's going to be uneven. I mean, this was a plot they had planted in the spring, sort of the same way, but so they had standing corn. This was the row, man, got skips and, oh, got a planter. Well, the planter probably actually had the seed there, but it wasn't getting good seed to soil contact. Row behind would have been the one of the rows that had been repaired, and probably actually one that had sweeps on. Very nice looking stand. So again, let's take a look. This was actually from if you remember the big hairy vetch, that hairy vetch was planter frame high plus, and this is your seed where they're actually placing the seed. You see it swept out, really didn't move any dirt, but nicely swept out and planting in there. So that's what we're looking at. We want to get that seed bed, clean so we don't put stuff in. I mean, this stalk here is a late emerger, is a weed, taking moisture away from the good ones, fertility away from the good ones, and isn't going to put a viable ear on. So that's why we pay attention when we do sweeps. Again, as I said, we want to make sure that we do a sweep. We aren't trying to move a lot of dirt. We'd like to get the residue out of the way, but we're trying to prevent this when we get a hairpin or one that's not getting that good seed to soil contact. We've had some emphasis on crop rollers. We had some guys doing it both ways, rolling it independent or on the planter. The ones I see on the planter is sort of can be a little higher maintenance. I have a little feeling sometimes rolling it outside, being on the planter, or something happens to this on the planter, you can put your whole planter down. The other one, you have a little rescue time to do things. So I think we're going to see more of it. I did talk about, we'll talk a little bit fertilizer application, a couple things. You remember the roots that couldn't get out, the glazed sidewall. Single disc fertilizer openers will tend to glaze a sidewall pretty quick. So one of the things that, I started to go back and look at some installation manuals and all, and early on, it always seemed like you put the opener blade between the drop point and the seed trench. And if that opener made a glazing on the sidewall, the roots can't get through that glazing to get to the fertilizer you put in the ground. So one of the things that we want to look at, and maybe you got to move fertilizer openers around a little bit, We want the fertilizer to be dropped between the fertilizer opener blade and the seed trench. We don't want this fertilizer drop point in the opposite side of the fertilizer blade. So something to take a look at. Again, not necessarily, it's a little time consuming maybe to move some openers around, but it's not a necessarily a big expense, but maybe will help you in the end with yield. Again, all sorts of ways to put fertilizer on between the seed drop and your closing in front of the row units. Again, many different ways. Again, numerous ways to put in-furrow fertilizer down, pop up in, and then we also have some, we're seeing more dribbling nitrogen out behind, put maybe a little stabilizer in the nitrogen or a little starter on top of the ground, banded on top of the ground. Again, newer systems coming out. This is actually has a knife in between the split gauge wheel, so we are very consistent with our fertilizer spacing off the row. Another system to actually have 3 application points near in the seed trench and in the seed trench walls. Again, fertilizer systems can be very simple or they can be very complicated. I mean, there's no reason to, basically the ones pictured here are like a commercial self-propelled sprayer, you know, PWM controlled rates, so we can do variable rate and do section control on the planters. One of the things they do encourage guys with liquid to have some form of individual row monitoring and keep an eye. I mean, red balls are simple, unless you're doing black label or something, then you can't see the balls floating, but for nitrogen and most starter fertilizers, they do a nice quick reference point to know that we're getting, you know, keeping fairly even between rows. There's other ones that are more electronic that are available today. They all work very well. We're even getting technology that we can do that turn compensation, you know, flow meter with variable rate and turn compensation, so we can control fertilizer. Another one to look at is point row clutches. The savings on seed is part of it. The other part is, when you think about this, we've got twice the population here, so this is going to be areas that you're going to be overpopulated, so your moisture and soil fertility probably can't support it all. And the other thing that happens too here is, because it's overpopulated, those are areas that maybe you'll go down and give you more trouble. So point row clutches do a lot. I mean, you know, in those, you know, we're stressing the ears in those overpopulated areas compared to having healthy ears. So those are things. Point row clutches will pay for themselves. I used to figure about 500 acres and 3 years, I could pretty well pay back a clutch system just on seed savings alone on our odd-shaped fields of Pennsylvania. And some of your New York areas would be similar with the odd-shaped fields we have. And that didn't count for any, you know, yield bump in the overplanted areas that guys are saying. So those are some of the things. Lots of different meters out here today. The vacuum meters are taking over a little more, I think, over the finger. The finger is still good, but need maintenance and make sure the meters are all in working condition. We're seeing more and more come out with electric drives. And of course, the electric drive is doing clutching and doing variable rate. The one thing that electric drive and most of the electric drives, they're doing turn compensation. So if you think you're going around a turn like this, you know what happens? The inside goes too fast, the outside goes too slow. So our population changes. So if you think about it, I mean, we're losing yield because we're underpopulated on the outside and we're overpopulated on the inside, so we're losing yields in 2 places. This was sort of you know, showing, you know, that effect, the inside row, the outside row. So that's one of the things that the electric drive is allowing us to do, is turn compensation around. Instead of having a planter-wide population, each row is doing it. So we're getting what we're looking for. Technology for higher speed to actually deliver the seed to the furrow is, there's about 4 vendors now doing that. The next technology probably we haven't hit real hard yet. It's multi-hybrid. Again, you know, I talked about, you know, different hybrids for germination. Well, do we have a hybrid that we want to put on our shale hill and something different that we want to down in our flat of the field? And so are we going to start picking hybrids that have characteristics that work better in one soil condition or another within a field setting? So that's something that's coming in the industry, is looking at multi-hybrid units. So again, I'd like to go back and just sort of highlight this. What are the priorities of the planter pass? Of course, as I said, we're looking at the ear count pyramid. So the first one is emergence. So emergence is going to depend on good seed to soil contact, moisture in the furrow, and soil temperature. So those are things that we need to watch out for with our planter. You know, if we don't get out and check, you know, is the seed going where we really would like it? Do we need to make it a little deeper? Singulation, again, is making sure the meter's doing the job. You know, we're not getting skips, we're not getting multiples. Spacing, you know, again, speed, the typical speed tube, or the typical seed tube was made, that curve in the seed tube was actually made for about 5 miles an hour to give 0 velocity when a seed came out the bottom of the seed tube. So if you get much over 5 miles an hour, you will get some more seed roll in the seed trench, and your spacing can go. And then population, it's population that you set to do the job that you want. You know, this was a picture that came out of an operator's manual, probably at the turn of the century. It looks like a real modern corn planter there. To ensure good work and accurate planting, corn planters must be well oiled, and all parts must be firmly in position. Parts must be replaced when badly worn, or the efficiency of the planter is impaired. And I think, I mean, you could put that in today's current planter. I mean, we have all this technology on it, but if it's not in good working order and you know, properly maintained, it's not going to do any better job than this one did planting. So it's something to do. One of the things that I so much find at fault that we get in a hurry, we don't spend time checking behind the planter. I mean, that's digging seed, making adjustments on the planter as we change field conditions, you know, doing some depth measurements. Or is our depth where we want? Are we into that moisture band? Should we be a little deeper? You know, we've, you know, 1 3/4 is a nice shooting depth, but maybe 2 1/4 is where the moisture is, and we'll get that good seed to soil contact. So we need to get behind the planter, dig in the furrow, find the seed. I have had people say, well, I have problems finding seed. Well, when I started here, I went out and started a planter planting carrots, and I'll tell you what, it's a boulder in the seed trench, a kernel of corn compared to a carrot seed. And the guy had a 9-row planter, and we did population and depth checks about 3 or 4 times on each of the 9 rows. So it takes a little patience, but if things are working right, you should be able to find that seed. Double check the population, you know, make sure that tire pressures are set beginning of the year. Do a little checking to make sure that your population, your monitors, is doing the job you want. The thing that, you know, we're looking for at the end is we want a nice, what we call picket fence stand. And what you're looking for is you're looking for stalks that are even. You want stalks that are nicely spaced. You don't want to see thin stalks, light stalks, thin, you know, heavy stalks and thin stalks. You want the stalks to look sort of like mirrored copies of each other. it's just so important to go out, because to recover a poorly done planting job, you'll never recover. To replant is not always beneficial. Take time in the season to check behind the planter, check your fields as they start to emerge. You know, okay, I got skips. Is a good time to dig, and do I have a seed there where the skip is that's a late germ, or, you know, is it truly not a skip in the field? That sometimes is some of the biggest payback. Did have a customer a number of years ago call me and was upset because he said something's wrong with the planter, don't have a stand. You know, it was, and we went to visit the farmer, and I had corn that was knee high, had corn that was just spiking out the ground, you know, a leaf or two, and I had spaces that I didn't see anything, and got looking. I dug up the corn that was knee high and realized it was only planted about a ½ inch deep, and he just didn't realize that, you know, they hadn't checked the planter as they went through the field to see if they had the depth right, enough adequate down pressure to actually hold it at the depth they were at. And what I figured out is it was dry, got dry when they planted, and then they got rain. So where they had moisture, that's what came up early, and what was just spiking through was from a rain. And looking, there was seed on top of the ground. So that's how shallow it was. And it's, you know, tell a guy probably your best to do is go in and take it out and replant it. It's not, you know, a little time with behind the planter. I know we get in a hurry in the spring, but to me, the one thing that I will say is the most important thing after you do your winter maintenance on the planter is make sure you take time as you change fields, change field conditions, to get behind that planter and make sure it's doing the job you want it to do. I think Joe said I can get it might be some opportunity for a couple questions. That's pretty much what I have here.
So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can enter them to the Q&A and I can ask them for you. Yeah, thanks, Dave, for a great presentation. I learned a lot. So I guess we'll wait a couple minutes to see if some questions roll in.
Okay.
Have you seen anyone use the multi-hybrid planters down in PA yet?
No, I do not have anybody running the multi-hybrids in PA yet. It's that I know of. It doesn't mean there isn't somebody that maybe is. I think some of our conditions would lend itself to it with some of our shale knobs and the flats of the field, maybe changing hybrids. I see some of it more maybe even just simply being able to change rates, lighten up. I mean, I saw that down on the Eastern Shore where they got a lot of pivots and corn. They used to have dry land corners that they would plant to other crops because, you know, it wasn't easy to change rates, or they would plant under the water and then come back and plant the dry land corners at a different rate. With the variable rate, that makes it pretty nice that they can make that change as they go in and out of their water.
We got one question. What is the advantage of a narrow inner diameter gauge wheel? And then the second, I'll wait for the second one.
Okay, so the reduced inner diameter or the Case AH style gauge wheel. The original theory behind that was it gave a little area for the soil to blow up into as the seed opener lifted, so you didn't compact the sidewall as quick. I always feel that if you have the down pressure set where it is, you shouldn't be compacting with your gauge wheels. I do have a couple customers, long-term no-tillers, find that actually, you know, they started with that and then they found out that they needed a little more firming along that seed trench to keep the seed trench from falling apart before the seed had a chance to settle in, so they were getting on even depth. I think if you, it would, and what I used to tell people, it's not the first place I would spend my money to fix it. I'd make sure the rest of the planter maintenance, seed openers, you know, gauge wheels, parallel arms were in right shape. I mean, to go and just think you're going to solve all your problems by putting reduced inner diameter was not a good way to spend money. Sort of ranked, you know, where I would spend money first, and that would not have been one of the high ones.
So we have the second one from that person was, do all seed companies run a cold germ test? Is that a...
From what I'm hearing is some of that is available, but they don't publish it per se. And some of those cold germ tests and some of that can be related to handling and storage of the seed too. So that's sort of a stress test. So if bags get, you know, dropped and banged and or improper storage, that can affect those tests a little more than, from what I understand, than, you know, the warm germ test.
Another question.
I mean, they try to, I think some of the seed companies sort of do that with cold vigor or seedling vigor. They try to do it without, I know the one equipment vendor, they have a research farm and they've been pretty much doing a lot of this. And then the one plot this past spring, they had two hybrids they planted side by side and had done cold germ. And the cold germ one, I think, was about 60%, and the other one was probably about 90. And they saw it in the field the same way in the field. In fact, it showed actually worse in the field than it did in the test itself. They were under 50% germination in the field with the poor one, side by side. So yes, it's something. And you can have, I don't want to say you don't use a pool germ cold test, but it's a management tool. You know, if you got cold rain coming, that variety you probably don't want to plant at that time, but it could be a great yielding variety. So you just got to make sure that you're planting it in the conditions that give it the best shot at doing the best.
Another question was, how do you address planter performance issues between custom operator crews and growers?
How do you
address planter performance issues between custom crews and growers? I'm having trouble.
There are some very good custom operators, and there's some ones that I wouldn't want to have plant my corn. As a dealership, we support both of them. As I said, we have some ones that do a tremendous job, you know, have good equipment and do it. Some of it is you as a customer need to pay attention. You need to do a little checking behind that custom operator. I mean, if he's not getting the depth, not having something set right, and you feel that way, you have to have a discussion with your custom person. I mean, ultimately, you're sort of responsible for your crop, not the custom operator. So just having a custom guy in doesn't, you might not, you know, be able to do that. I mean, it's just like, I used to have a custom combine guy come in and I'd look behind and, you know, hey, I'm seeing more stuff coming out the back, and, you know, yeah, then he'd tweak it. And I said, oh, now it looks a whole lot better. But hey, those guys are, sometimes the custom guys are, how many acres going to get? And I got the next customer hollering, they're not going to get out and do a lot of checking. You know, it worked at the last customer. It was okay for the last customer. You need to be checking a little behind it.
Well, looks like we don't have any more questions, but I just want to thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your equipment expertise with everyone.